And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, March 3rd. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. So here are some of the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. The Council of Canadians has raised several concerns with the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act, Bill S-11, in a submission to the Standing Senate Committee on Aboriginal Peoples. With 117 communities under water advisories in December in Canada alone, the Council of Canadians strongly supports the creation of legislation that recognizes First Nation communities' right to water and ensures safe drinking water for First Nation communities. Quote, water is a human right, public trust, and global commons, unquote, says Council of Canadian National Water campaigner Emma Lau, who prepared the submission. We are extremely concerned that the bill as it stands lacks funding commitments and could open the door to water privatization on First Nation communities. The bill also currently gives the Canadian government the power to force the community to allow private for-profit entities to build, operate, and or manage its water services. The UN passed 2 resolutions last year recognizing the right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation, with the second resolution making the right legally binding. The Council's submission highlights that several clauses in Bill S-11 are inconsistent with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or DRIP as it's known, which Canada endorsed last November. In developing Bill S-11, many First Nation communities are not consulted, were not consulted, and the bill does not require consultation in developing regulations on safe drinking water for First Nation communities, she said. The American Indian Health web portal is sponsored by the National Library of Medicine. The portal is designed to bring together health and medical resources to the American Indian population, including policies, consumer health information for everyday people, ways to access health care, and research. This site is designed for health professionals that work with American Indians by providing them with information and tools they can use. It also has easy-to-understand information to help all American Indian people learn more about their health problems and to help them live healthier lives. And we're going to put that URL up there, which is at americanindianhealth.nlm.nih.gov, so you can get there and find some of that information yourself. And today we go to talk with Alaska Public Radio News Director Lori Townsend from Anchorage, Alaska, on a couple of topics from that faraway state. Welcome to the Native News Update, Lori. Can you give us a little report today on what's going on in Alaska with Chickaloon Village and a couple other things?
Sure. Hi, Paul. The Chickaloon Athabascan people are fighting a mining prospect in their area. It's called the Wishbone Hill Prospect, and it would have a road that goes directly alongside one of their waterways, Moose Creek, and that's an area that they've spent more than $1 million restoring so that it could be a successful salmon return creek again. And now there's this prospect of a mine that they don't appreciate having in the area, both for the truck traffic and the worry about contamination of the water there. So they are invoking the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to fight this mine. The traditional chief of Chickaloon, Gary Harrison, went earlier this week to testify to the UN expert on water who is in the United States for the first time. Her name is Katarina de Albuquerque, and she's here to take testimony, and she'll be meeting with State Department officials. And so Chief Harrison went to California to meet with her and present the Chickaloon's position on this mining effort to her. And so it's sort of seen as a test case in Alaska to see how this Indigenous rights or rights of Indigenous peoples document could be used to perhaps stop or some of these development projects.
Water seems to have been a key provision within that declaration because there's several Canadian tribes that are raising it in the context of a clean water bill for First Nations, and they're basically demanding some UN intervention or the application of the UN Declaration in the consultation process there as well. Did Chickaloon have any capability to impact the licensing of that mine?
Well, it's in the very preliminary stages. They're applying for permits now, and the new Department of Natural Resources Commissioner, Dan Sullivan, his name is. He was the former Attorney General here in the state. And he was just appointed to be the new Commissioner of DNR in December. And he was on one of our talk programs recently saying that he agrees that the mandate of the state constitution that says that resources should be developed for the maximum benefit of all Alaskans also means that Alaskans need to be protected to make sure that their water and their land is kept clean. So it will be interesting to see how he balances these things. He is intending to meet directly with the Chickaloon people. They have a meeting set up for about a week from now or so. I think it's the 15th of March. He's meeting with them. And they'll be talking to him about their long history here in that area, and the fact that the area where the mine is and where the roads system will be is where they do a lot of their hunting and fishing for potlatches and other important gatherings and ceremonies. And so that's the case that they'll be presenting to the Attorney General and to the UN Council.
Okay, well, we'll check in with you and see if there's some progress on that. I asked you about the Iditarod. What can you tell me about is there native impact influence like the John Bear Grease run from Duluth up to Thunder Bay and back was based on an Ojibwe mail carrier? Where do you see the natives involved in the Iditarod?
Well, of course, the history of dog mushing in Alaska started in Alaska Native villages. That's where people had dogs, and that's how they traveled around. And there's still some of that out there, not as much as there was in the past, because a lot of people travel on snow machines. That's what they're known as here in Alaska. In the Midwest, they're snowmobiles, of course, but here they're snow machines. And that's how people get around now. But there's still a lot of mushing going on. And the Iditarod race is 1,000 miles from the ceremonial start is in Anchorage, and that's on Saturday. And then the official start is the next day in Willow. And then they take off for 1,000 miles to Nome. And there are several native mushers. I'm not sure of the exact numbers yet. I haven't reviewed all the mushers' stats yet to see who all is involved this year. But there will certainly be a strong showing of native mushers in the race, and we'll update you as to who they are and how they're doing as the race gets underway on Saturday. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes you'll have to come up here for it, because it's great to go to the ceremonial start and see all the dogs and the people and the excitement, and it's just a lot of great fun.
How long does that run usually last?
Probably 10 days or so, or less, before the first mushers start getting up there.
Right. Tell me a little bit about what you perceive about what's going on in Wisconsin. I know you're reading about it. Your state, with Sarah Palin as a vice presidential candidate, kind of unleashed certain things, including the Tea Party Express stuff. And now we have a few of those people, including a governor in the state of Wisconsin, who now has a capital loaded with 80,000 people, 100,000 people at times. Yesterday, the former Congressman Dave Obey was barred from going in there during public hours, and because the governor says they ain't going to let people into the state capitol despite a judge's order and an injunction against what the governor's doing. What do people far away perceive? Are people talking about that in Alaska in any way, or what's your perception of how that's seen? Are we just nuts in Wisconsin?
No, you are not. It's fascinating to watch this exercise in people getting out and getting involved, and I think that it's a real education nationally for everyone to pay attention to these issues and what's really at stake here, and who's sort of behind closed doors making these decisions and making these things happen. So the good news, I think, is that it's a fantastic civic exercise of people saying, here's what we won't stand for. And the fact that they're continuing on is just fascinating to me and amazing that people feel so strongly that they are keeping this effort up. And I think at some point the governor is going to have to realize that they're not going away, and there's going to have to be some compromise here. But I think that it's great for people to really start to educate themselves about what are the real issues here. There's been a lot of conflicting information about what's really going on as far as what's at stake. So I think it's good for people to go to a variety of sources. If you're only getting your news from CNN or only from Fox, you really, really it's your personal responsibility to look at other news outlets and get a much more well-rounded look at these things.
For example, a lot of people think that the only issue is binding arbitration in unions, when the budget repair bill was 144 pages long, had the sale of assets and heating and generating plants, had the privatization of state assets, had cuts in Badger Care, Medicare, shifting of funds for transportation projects that are based on the same Walker philosophy that light rail isn't going to work because that's public transportation versus private transportation. And now that the budget repair period seems to be kind of closing out, that was an emergency 2-week session, and he's announced the new budget bill with millions of dollars of other cuts and shifts in funding. They're talking about reintroducing legislation to repeal the mascot challenge bill. They've introduced a bill to repeal the 1990 Wisconsin recycling provisions. They're proposing, some of the Republicans, I was there on the assembly floor watching the non-debate because it was so restricted to the Republicans against the Democrats, about casino compact negotiations. The tribes have called off apparently a State of the Nation's address that was due next Tuesday and are thinking about replanning it for later in April. And so we seem to be generating more issues that are going to bring more people to Madison as time goes by. So keep an eye on it, because some people are saying this is the line in the sand that in Wisconsin it was drawn to begin fighting back on some of these issues.
And I think that's the good message here. There's a lot of conflict going on, and that's unfortunate. But I think the good thing is that people are paying attention, not just in Wisconsin, but across the nation. And hopefully they're working at digging in and saying, now what's really going on here? And what do I need to know from both sides of this issue that are the facts, not the rhetoric, but the facts. And that's what I would really encourage people to do, is make sure that they're looking at a wide range of media news outlets before they make their decisions. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with social media especially, is that the word on an issue can go out so quickly now. Right. And it's increasingly important for people to make sure that they're really educating themselves well, because it's far too easy for someone to pick up a Twitter feed or some Facebook posting and just run with that as fact. And so it's increasingly more and more important that people really take that personal responsibility to educate themselves and not just rely on one source for their information.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Lori. We're going to get back to you on a couple issues perhaps next week on that race. And of
That's
course,
great.
The presidential elections, people are already sparring there to begin get into the primary process. Your favorite lady up there, Sarah Palin, is running in the polls at about 22% on the Republican ticket. We'll have to see where she goes with that. We want to keep in touch and have you update us on some of the other things going on in Alaska as well soon.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to say miigwech for showing up. Come back again tomorrow when Kimberly Acosta does the news.